Hi everyone. When I've recorded this, hopefully everybody has enjoyed their first day back at school, those who made it. Those who didn't make it, I hope you enjoyed doing some more online learning or learning from home with the work that you've been given. Chapter 23, Dangerous Waters. Here we go. The current was swift in the darkness the great wooded hill swept by. For a moment the moon peeped from the cloud and turned the rippling surface into a stream of silver. "Stay away, moon," Ruth muttered. "Don't come out again till we've passed the village." Side by side, the two canoes sped on. On the left bank, the line of hills curved downwards. Were those dim shapes houses? Had they reached the village? Again the moon appeared. It had chosen quite the wrong moment, for this was indeed the village, with houses crowded about both banks, and on the left bank, suddenly an open space with lorries in it. They were so close together that they were almost touching, and there were several rows of houses. These must be the lorries that were to take the Polish refugees back to Poland. With a tightening fear in her throat, Ruth realized that if they were spotted now, they would be taken back too. "Look out for the bridge," said Eric. He and Jan shot ahead, aiming for the center of the three arches, edging away from the square. Ruth paddled towards the right-hand arch. Eric's canoe shot under the arch and disappeared into the shadows. Too far to the right, Ruth got caught in sluggish water. She drifted broadside onto the base of the arch. The water was noisy and Ruth did not hear the footsteps on the bridge. But she saw a man's shadow on the water and it was moving. She paddled frantically to get free. "The water's coming in! I can feel it damp under me," said Bronia. A man shouted, and a shadow leaned far over the water. The canoe was still across the base of the arch, with the water thrusting against each end, threatening to break its back. She jabbed hard with the paddle and managed to ease it a little. The man was right overhead, shouting and waving, but she could not understand what he was saying. In the distance a dog barked. A pair of legs dangled over the parapet and scraped against a stone. An American soldier. With the last effort, she thrust the stonework and the canoe broke free, but the soldier had clambered down and jumped into the water, where it was shallow at the side. He caught the paddle and clung on. Ruth twisted, tugged, then let go of it, and the canoe swung sideways into the shadows under the arch. The soldier, not expecting her to let go, toppled over backwards and fell with a splash into the river. As the canoe shot out beyond the bridge, Ruth realized that she was in the mercy of the current. Bronia had no paddle and could not help. 2 or 3 shots from the bridge whizzed past her cheek, and she pushed Bronia's head down against the canvas. She peered ahead to see if she could see anything of the other canoe. Then the moon went behind a cloud, and the darkness hid her. There were no more shots, but she felt helpless as the current drove them wherever it chose. On they sped in the water foaming against the bows, spitting and bubbling against the canvas. "I'm sitting in the river," said Bronia. But Ruth took no notice. "Eric, Jan," she shouted. As they rounded a bend, they were thrust against the right bank. The river was quieter here, and soon they felt the bottom of the canoe scrape over the petals and slow them to a halt. Ruth put her hand over the side and down into the water and tried to shove them off, but they were stuck. There was a pale light in the sky now, and the rim of the hill stood out dark against it. It was still too dark to see much, but she could make out rocks in the water, rounded like hippos' backs. "We'll have to get out and push," she said. They stepped into the water, which was little more than ankle deep, and at once the canoe floated. With the painter in her hand and Bronia beside her, she threw it gently along till they came to a large V-shaped rock that seemed to project from the bank. She pulled the canoe high and dry onto a shoal of pebbles, then lifted Bronia onto a rock. "We must wait here till daylight," she said. And they sat there shivering and clinging to each other till the shadows brightened, and they could see the whole sweep of the river, white and broken in the middle, rock-strewn and shallow at either side, with the wood-muffled hills hemming it in, and not a soul in sight. No sight of Eric or Jan. they could have not felt lonelier. Then Bronier saw something which gave them hope. Down in the water, near the point of the V-shaped rock, was a stick that looked as if it might serve as a paddle. She climbed down to get it, and found it was the very paddle they had lost. This was luck indeed. They turned the canoe over and poured the water out. Then with new confidence, they launched it again, stepping aboard, and they headed for midstream. And the current caught them and carried them out towards the rapids. The river grew faster and the bank flashed past. Soon they were in a kind of gorge where the river squeezed past great boulders, some of them as high as houses. Some of the swells were over a foot high. The spray dashed over the bow and stung their faces. The water roared here so that even the loudest shout could not be heard. Out to the left there was a huge oily surges that looked as if they would pound you down into the depths if you got caught in them. Bronier closed her eyes and clung to her sister's waist. Ruth was not as scared as she had expected to be. With a triumphant sense of exhilaration, she flashed in with her paddle, heading always for open stream, away from the broken water where the rocks lay hidden. Now and then a boulder loomed up, and she knew that if they struck it, it would be dashed to pieces. But a quick dip of the paddle at the right moment was enough to shoot them safely past. In no time the river broadened, the boulders eased, and the banks were wooded again. The terror of the rapids were over. Ruth hoped that Eric and Jan, whose two-seater was much less easy to manoeuvre, had been as successful as they had. There seemed no need for a paddle now, for the water was clear of rocks and the current smooth and swift. They could lie back and let the canoe take care of itself. Bronier closed her eyes and fell asleep. Ruth lay back and watched the blue sky overhead and the climbing sun. It was to be another scorching day, and she too became sleepy and dozed. A grating, tearing sound brought her to her senses. She found herself thigh-deep in water. The canoe had grounded on a shoal, and a sharp stone had ripped the canvas underneath. She looked about her. The river was very broad here, and they were near the right bank, where it was shallow and easy to wade ashore. They stepped out and scraped the waterlogged craft over the pebbles to the bank and hauled it ashore. "The tier's too long to mend," said Ruth. "We shall have to leave the canoe and walk. It can't be far to the Danube now." They found a path which threaded its way through the trees on the bank, and they followed it to the last big bend before the river joined the Danube at Falkenberg. There were no woods here, only green fields, a dusty country road, and a gently sloping bank that reached far out to the river. Ruth made for the bank, for she thought it would give her a good view of the river in both directions, and some chance of seeing Eric and Jan. Except for a couple of unfinished haystacks, the bank was deserted. She did not know that 2 sentries had posted themselves here for most of the morning on the lookout for their canoe. Weary with waiting, they had climbed to the top of one of the haystacks and taken it in turns to go to sleep. The first she knew of their presence was when a half-eaten apple struck her on the shoulder. Then there was a bark, and Ludwig was licking her ankles. "Where have you been all this time? We thought you must have come to grief in the rapids," said Jan, who was standing on top of the stack. He gave the sleeping Eric a shove, and the boy landed, with hay sticking out of his hair and his shirt right at Bronier's feet. It was a merry greeting. "We came to grief too," said Eric. "Same way you did, but we travelled further before we went aground." Not 100 yards away, a convoy of American lorries swept up the road in a pother of dust. They were crammed with refugees, most of them Poles, and all grimly silent. But the children were so busy talking and laughing over their experiences that they didn't even notice. Okay, today's work for the Silver Sword, chapter 23. We've only got 4 questions to do today, so there's a bit of thinking involved though, so we still really want you to be looking hard at answering the questions with as much detail as you can, and where it permits, using evidence from the story to back up your answers. Then there's an A to Z to do. So you can go back over the whole story and find things that start with the letters of the alphabet to put into your adventure. They could be one word or two words or complete sentences. It's up to you to be how creative you can and to see if you can get every single letter of the alphabet put together. This would be a good activity for display. So if you want to think about your elements of design when you're doing this, this would be a good opportunity to get some of your work out and shared with others. We're still looking to put work on the school blog, and these may even go on your Seesaw account. So let's do a really good job of it. Look forward to the next chapter. Chapter 24, Missing. Let's see what happens there.